The electric crackling of 50,000 volts cut through the crisp Colorado evening air as Tyler Morrison pressed the taser against Maya Chen's shoulder, his cruel smile illuminated by the device's blue sparks. What Tyler didn't know as he prepared to torture the quiet transfer student behind Riverside Falls High School was that those same hands he was about to electrocute belonged to someone who could deliver a knockout punch with the precision of a surgical strike. Someone who had spent 8 years learning to turn her fists into weapons under the guidance of a former heavyweight contender. Someone who was about to teach the sheriff's golden boy the most brutal lesson of his entitled life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The mountain air in Riverside Falls, Colorado carried the scent of pine and snow even in late September. But for Maya Chen, it might as well have been poison. Every breath reminded her of how far she was from home, how different this small town of 12,000 felt compared to the bustling suburbs of Denver, where she'd spent most of her 17 years. The Chen family's move to Riverside Falls hadn't been about seeking adventure in Colorado's high country or embracing small-town charm. It had been about survival, about finding a place where Dr. Sarah Chen could afford to rebuild her medical practice after a malpractice lawsuit had destroyed everything they'd worked for. Maya pressed her face against the cold window of their second-floor apartment in the Maple Ridge complex, watching the early morning mist roll down from the surrounding peaks. The view was undeniably beautiful, but beauty didn't pay the bills or erase the memory of watching their Denver home get foreclosed on while her mother worked 18-hour shifts at the emergency room trying to keep their family afloat. The apartment they now called home was clean but cramped, with thin walls that let every sound from their neighbors drift through and heating that worked sporadically when the Colorado mountain winds picked up. Her younger sister Lily was already awake, sitting at their small kitchen table with textbooks spread around her like battle plans. At 15, Lily possessed an optimism that Maya envied and protected in equal measure. Where Maya saw obstacles and potential threats, Lily saw opportunities and new friendships waiting to be made. The contrast between them had never been more apparent than during their first week at Riverside Falls High School, where Lily had already joined the debate team and volunteered to help with the upcoming homecoming decorations while Maya had perfected the art of moving through hallways like a ghost. The truth was that Maya Chen had been invisible long before their family's financial catastrophe had forced them into exile from their comfortable suburban life. She'd discovered early that being overlooked was often safer than being noticed, especially in environments where social hierarchies were enforced through cruelty and exclusion. At her previous school in Denver, Maya had managed to navigate 4 years without attracting the attention of the popular crowd or their inevitable victims, maintaining a careful balance that kept her safe but alone. But invisibility required different skills in a town like Riverside Falls, where everyone's parents had graduated from the same high school decades earlier, and newcomers were examined with the intensity usually reserved for exotic specimens. The building itself felt like a shrine to tradition, with trophy cases lining every hallway and team photos dating back to the 1960s covering available wall space. The message was unmistakable. This was a place where athletic achievement and family legacy mattered above all else, where having the right last name could excuse almost any behavior. Maya's mother had taken a position at Riverside Falls General Hospital, a small facility that served the mountain communities scattered throughout the region. The pay was significantly less than what she'd earned in Denver, but it was honest work that didn't require her to constantly defend her professional reputation against lawyers who saw dollar signs in every medical decision. Dr. Sarah Chen had always been a fighter, working her way through medical school while raising 2 daughters and building a practice that served some of Denver's most underserved communities. Watching her mother's strength crumble under the weight of legal fees and professional assassination had been almost unbearable for Maya, who'd inherited her mother's stubborn determination along with her quiet intensity. The financial strain had forced Maya to find part-time work at Mountain Grounds, a coffee shop that catered to tourists heading up to the ski resorts and locals who needed caffeine to face another day in their small mountain town. The owner, Mrs. Patterson, was a kind woman who'd emigrated from Guatemala 30 years earlier and understood what it meant to start over in a place where your accent marked you as different. She paid Maya fairly and didn't ask questions about why a 17-year-old girl was working 20 hours a week while maintaining a 4.0 grade point average. The job provided more than just income, though. It gave Maya a window into Riverside Falls' social dynamics, allowing her to observe the town's power structures while remaining safely behind the counter. She learned that Sheriff Robert Morrison's family had controlled local law enforcement for 3 generations, that the Morrison name appeared on half the business licenses in town, and that Sheriff Morrison's son Tyler was considered untouchable royalty at Riverside Falls High School. Maya had also learned about Iron Will Boxing Academy, tucked away in a converted warehouse on the industrial side of town, where tourists never ventured. The gym was owned and operated by Coach Marcus Rodriguez, a former professional heavyweight who'd retired after a career-ending injury but had never lost his passion for the sport. Maya had discovered the gym during one of her evening walks, drawn by the rhythmic sound of gloves hitting heavy bags and the controlled violence that seemed to echo from within. The first time she'd pushed through the gym's heavy doors, Maya had expected to be dismissed or ignored. Instead, Coach Rodriguez had looked at her with the assessing eyes of someone who'd spent decades evaluating potential fighters. He'd seen something in her posture, in the way she carried herself with controlled tension, that suggested she might be more than just another curious teenager looking for a trendy fitness class. That had been 3 years ago, back in Denver, when Maya had been struggling with her own anger at her family's deteriorating circumstances and her powerlessness to help. Coach Rodriguez had been running a satellite program at a community center in their neighborhood, teaching boxing to kids who needed an outlet for their frustration and a path toward discipline. Maya had started attending his classes reluctantly, dragged there by a school counselor who thought physical activity might help her process her emotions more constructively. What she'd found instead was a revelation. Boxing wasn't just about throwing punches or learning to absorb punishment. It was about precision, timing, and the mental discipline required to remain calm under extreme pressure. Coach Rodriguez taught his students that real power came from control, that the most dangerous fighters were often the quietest ones who could explode into action when necessary but preferred to avoid conflict altogether. Over 3 years of training, Maya had developed into something Coach Rodriguez had rarely seen, a natural fighter with the temperament of a monk. Her punches carried devastating power when she chose to unleash them, but her default setting was defensive, strategic, always looking for ways to end confrontations without causing unnecessary damage. She'd sparred with boys twice her size and held her own, had competed in amateur tournaments where her unorthodox style and unexpected strength. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Had earned respect from trainers who'd initially dismissed her as too small and too quiet to be a serious competitor. The move to Riverside Falls had meant leaving Coach Rodriguez's gym behind. But Maya had maintained her training routine through solitary workouts and the occasional session at Iron Will when she could afford the drop-in fees. She'd been careful not to attract attention to her boxing background, understanding that in a small town like Riverside Falls, being known as a fighter could create more problems than it solved. Maya's routine at Riverside Falls High School had become a carefully choreographed dance of avoidance and observation. She arrived each morning precisely 7 minutes before the first bell, timing her entrance to avoid the crowded hallways where social hierarchies were most aggressively displayed. Her locker was positioned in a corner near the science wing, away from the main thoroughfares where the popular students held court and established their daily pecking orders. The school's social ecosystem was more rigid than anything Maya had encountered in Denver's larger, more diverse environment. At Riverside Falls High, your family's history in town determined your starting position in the hierarchy, but maintaining that position required constant performance and enforcement. The Morrison family sat at the apex of this system, with Tyler Morrison wielding influence that extended far beyond typical high school popularity. His authority was backed by his father's badge, his family's generational wealth, and his position as starting quarterback on a football team that served as the town's primary source of pride and identity. Tyler Morrison moved through the school like a young king surveying his domain, his presence commanding attention and deference from students and faculty alike. At 18 years old and standing 6 feet 3 inches tall, he possessed the kind of natural athleticism that made everything look effortless, from threading a perfect spiral pass through double coverage to intimidating smaller students with nothing more than his physical presence. His sandy brown hair was always perfectly styled, his clothes carried the subtle markers of expensive brands, and his smile held the confidence of someone who had never been told that something was beyond his reach. But Maya's trained eye, honed by years of studying opponents in the boxing ring, caught details that others missed. She noticed the way Tyler's jaw tightened when teachers praised other students' academic achievements, the flash of anger that crossed his features when anyone dared to disagree with his opinions, and the calculating coldness that replaced his charming smile when he thought no one important was watching. These were the tells of someone whose confidence was built on domination rather than genuine self-assurance, someone who needed to diminish others to feel powerful himself. Tyler's girlfriend Madison Wells served as his perfect complement in cruelty, wielding social media influence and family connections with surgical precision. Madison's father owned the largest real estate development company in the region, making the Wells family newer money compared to the Morrison legacy, but wealthy enough to buy Madison a place in Riverside Falls as aristocracy. She documented her privileged life through carefully curated Instagram posts that showcased designer clothes, exotic vacations, and exclusive parties that most of her classmates could only dream of attending. Madison had perfected the art of psychological warfare that modern technology made possible, using her substantial social media following to amplify rumors, share embarrassing photos, and coordinate group harassment campaigns against students who crossed her or Tyler. Her attacks were always plausibly deniable, hidden behind layers of screenshots, anonymous accounts, and innocent sharing that made it difficult for school administrators to prove deliberate malice. She understood that in a generation raised on social platforms, destroying someone's online reputation could be more devastating than any physical assault. The supporting cast of Tyler's inner circle included Jake Sullivan, whose father managed the town's most successful ski equipment rental business, Connor Hayes, whose family owned the local bank that held mortgages on half the businesses in Riverside Falls, and Austin Miller, whose grandfather had been sheriff before Robert Morrison took over the position. Each boy brought his own family's influence to the group while serving as Tyler's enforcers when situations required more than just verbal intimidation or social exclusion. Maya had witnessed their methods during her first month at Riverside Falls High, observing from the safety of her peripheral position as they systematically destroyed Alex Thompson's social standing over the course of 3 weeks. Alex had made the mistake of correcting Tyler during a history class discussion about local mining operations, providing factual information that contradicted Tyler's confident but inaccurate statements about his great-grandfather's role in the region's development. The correction had been polite and well-sourced, but it had challenged Tyler's authority in front of 25 classmates and a teacher who had remained notably silent during the exchange. The retaliation began subtly, with Tyler's friends excluding Alex from group projects and spreading whispers about his family's financial struggles. The Thompson family had been hit hard by the closure of the lumber mill where Alex's father had worked for 15 years, forcing them to rely on his mother's part-time job at the grocery store while his father searched for employment in an economy that offered few opportunities for middle-aged men without college degrees. What should have remained private family business became public ammunition in Tyler's campaign of psychological destruction. Madison escalated the harassment by creating fake social media accounts that shared embarrassing photos of Alex from middle school, accompanied by captions that mocked his secondhand clothes and his family's reduced circumstances. The posts were designed to look like they came from anonymous classmates rather than a coordinated attack, giving Madison plausible deniability while maximizing the emotional damage. Within days, Alex went from being a quiet but respected student to a social pariah whose presence made others uncomfortable. The campaign culminated when someone, almost certainly Jake Sullivan based on his family's access to ski equipment, planted stolen merchandise in Alex's locker and then reported the theft to school security. Alex's tearful protests of innocence were dismissed by administrators who found it easier to believe that financial desperation had driven him to petty crime than to investigate the possibility that the sheriff's son and his friends had orchestrated an elaborate frame job. Alex was suspended for a week and banned from the upcoming homecoming dance, effectively completing his social exile from the school community. Maya had watched this systematic destruction with growing anger and professional admiration for the tactical precision Tyler's group displayed. They had identified their target's vulnerabilities, exploited multiple attack vectors simultaneously, and maintained plausible deniability throughout the campaign. It was the kind of coordinated assault that would have impressed military strategists. Applied to the destruction of a 15-year-old boy whose only crime had been sharing accurate historical information. But Maya also recognized the patterns from her boxing training, understanding that bullies like Tyler operated according to predictable psychological principles. They targeted victims who appeared isolated and vulnerable, escalated their attacks gradually to test for resistance, and relied on the passivity of bystanders to maintain their campaigns of terror. Most importantly, they avoided confrontations with opponents who might fight back effectively, preferring to maintain their reputations through the systematic destruction of those who couldn't or wouldn't resist. The faculty at Riverside Falls High School seemed either oblivious to these dynamics or deliberately blind to them, creating an environment where Tyler's group could operate with virtual impunity. Teachers who might have intervened in more obvious forms of bullying turned away from the subtle psychological warfare that Tyler and Madison employed, either because they genuinely didn't recognize the coordinated nature of the harassment, or because they understood the political costs of challenging the children of the town's most powerful families. Principal Janet Foster, a well-meaning woman in her 50s who had spent her entire career in Riverside Falls school system, appeared to genuinely believe that the conflicts she occasionally witnessed were normal teenage drama rather than systematic campaigns of psychological terrorism. Her attempts to address problems focused on individual incidents rather than patterns of behavior, making it easy for sophisticated operators like Tyler to avoid consequences by ensuring that no single action crossed clearly defined lines. Maya's sister Lily had adapted to this environment with the resilience that seemed to come naturally to her, finding ways to navigate the social complexities without attracting negative attention from the popular crowd. Lily possessed an intuitive understanding of group dynamics that allowed her to befriend students from different social circles without appearing to choose sides in the ongoing territorial battles that defined high school life. She joined the debate team, volunteered for various school committees, and somehow managed to maintain friendly relationships with both the academic achievers and the socially prominent students. But Maya knew that Lily's strategy of aggressive friendliness and universal likability was a luxury that not everyone could afford. Students like Alex Thompson, who lacked the social skills or family connections to protect themselves, remained vulnerable to predators who understood that their victims' isolation made retaliation unlikely. Maya had spent enough time in boxing gyms to recognize the dynamics of systematic intimidation, and she understood that Tyler Morrison was essentially running a protection racket, where students either submitted to his authority or faced destruction. The knowledge that she possessed the skills to challenge Tyler's reign of terror created a constant internal tension for Maya. Every instinct trained into her by Coach Rodriguez screamed that she should intervene when she witnessed injustice, that her abilities came with responsibilities to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. But Maya also understood the strategic reality of her situation. She was new to the community. Her family was financially vulnerable, and drawing Tyler's attention could result in consequences that extended far beyond her own well-being to threaten her mother's medical practice and her sister's carefully constructed social position. So Maya continued her careful dance of invisibility, documenting Tyler's methods with the analytical mind of someone who understood that knowledge was power, while maintaining the fiction that she was just another quiet transfer student trying to survive her senior year without incident. She had no way of knowing that Tyler Morrison was already planning to make her anonymity impossible, or that her boxing skills would soon be put to a test that would determine not just her own survival, but the future of every vulnerable student at Riverside Falls High School. The converted warehouse that housed Iron Will Boxing Academy sat in the forgotten corner of Riverside Falls, where the mountain town's carefully maintained tourist facade gave way to industrial reality. Maya discovered the gym during her third week in town, drawn by the rhythmic percussion of leather against heavy bags that echoed through the thin walls during her evening walks. The building itself was unremarkable, a squat concrete structure surrounded by auto repair shops and storage units, but something about the controlled violence emanating from within called to her like a siren song. Coach Marcus Rodriguez had been expecting someone different. When Maya first pushed through the gym's heavy steel doors on a cold Thursday evening in early October, most newcomers arrived with companions, teenagers dragged along by friends or parents seeking character-building activities for their wayward children. Maya arrived alone, moving with the measured steps of someone accustomed to assessing environments for potential threats and opportunities. Her clothes were practical rather than fashionable, her posture alert without being aggressive, and her eyes held the kind of focused intensity that Coach Rodriguez recognized from decades of working with serious fighters. The gym itself reflected its owner's philosophy about boxing as both art and science, The main floor housed 6 heavy bags suspended from reinforced ceiling beams, each one bearing the scars of thousands of training sessions delivered by fighters ranging from Olympic hopefuls to weekend warriors seeking stress relief. Speed bags mounted on adjustable platforms occupied one wall, their rapid-fire rhythm providing a percussion soundtrack for the more measured work happening elsewhere. A regulation-size ring dominated the center of the space, its canvas worn smooth by countless hours of sparring and technique practice. But it was the smaller details that revealed Coach Rodriguez's true priorities. Motivational quotes from legendary fighters covered the walls, not the typical inspirational platitudes found in commercial gyms, but hard-earned wisdom about discipline, respect, and the mental aspects of combat. "Boxing is a thinking man's sport," read one faded poster featuring Muhammad Ali in his prime. "Your mind is your most powerful weapon," proclaimed another, attributed to Manny Pacquiao. The equipment was meticulously maintained, showing signs of heavy use, but also careful attention to safety and functionality. Coach Rodriguez himself was a study in controlled power, standing 5 feet 10 inches with the compact build of someone who had spent decades turning his body into a precision instrument. At 52 years old, he moved with the fluid grace that marked former elite athletes, every gesture economical and purposeful. His hands bore the telltale marks of a career spent testing them against other men's faces and ribs, knuckles slightly enlarged, and fingers that had been broken and reset more times than he cared to remember. But his eyes held the sharp intelligence that had made him a formidable strategic fighter, rather than just another powerful puncher during his professional career. His accent carried traces of his childhood in East Los Angeles, where boxing had provided an alternative to the gang membership that claimed too many of his contemporaries. Coach Rodriguez had learned the sport in legendary gyms, where technique was beaten into young fighters through endless repetition and harsh correction, where respect was earned through demonstration rather than declaration. He'd carried those lessons through a professional career that had taken him as far as championship elimination bouts, before a detached retina ended his dreams of world titles and forced him to channel his passion into teaching others. Maya's initial visit to Iron Will had been purely observational, her fighter's instincts drawing her to study the training methods and assess the skill levels of the gym's regular members. She'd positioned herself near the entrance where she could watch without appearing intrusive, noting the way Coach Rodriguez moved between students with corrections and encouragement, the respectful interactions between fighters of different skill levels, and the serious but supportive atmosphere that permeated the training sessions. The gym attracted an eclectic mix of members, from serious amateur competitors preparing for regional tournaments to working-class adults who found in boxing an outlet for the frustrations of daily life in a town where economic opportunities remained limited. Maya observed a county sheriff's deputy working technical combinations on the heavy bag next to a high school teacher, practicing footwork drills, their shared passion for the sport transcending the social barriers that might have separated them in other contexts. The diversity was refreshing after the rigid hierarchies of Riverside Falls High School, where social mixing across class lines was discouraged through unspoken but firmly enforced protocols. What impressed Maya most was the culture of mutual respect that Coach Rodriguez had cultivated within his gym. Experienced fighters helped newcomers learn proper form and technique, sharing knowledge freely rather than hoarding secrets that might provide competitive advantages. Sparring sessions were conducted with controlled intensity, focused on skill development rather than ego gratification or dominance displays. The gym felt like a sanctuary where the outside world's problems could be temporarily forgotten in favor of the honest challenges of physical and mental improvement. After 3 visits spent observing from the sidelines, Maya finally approached Coach Rodriguez during a quiet moment between training sessions. She'd rehearsed her introduction carefully, knowing that first impressions would determine whether she gained access to the training she desperately missed or remained forever an outsider looking in. Her request to join the gym was delivered with the directness she'd learned from years of dealing with adults who respected honesty over manipulation. Coach Rodriguez's initial assessment of Maya's potential had been based on more than just her obvious physical fitness and athletic bearing. He'd noticed the way she watched other fighters, her eyes tracking combinations and defensive movements with the analytical focus of someone who understood what she was seeing. Her questions about training schedules and gym policies demonstrated knowledge of boxing culture that could only have come from serious previous experience. Most telling was her immediate acceptance of the gym's rules about respect, safety, and commitment, suggesting she understood that boxing was more than just organized violence. The membership fee at Iron Will was modest by design, set at a level that working-class families could afford while still allowing Coach Rodriguez to maintain the facility and purchase equipment. Maya's part-time income from Mountain Grounds coffee shop was barely sufficient to cover the monthly cost, forcing her to choose between boxing training and other teenage luxuries like new clothes or entertainment. The choice was easy for someone who had discovered that boxing provided both physical conditioning and mental clarity that she couldn't find anywhere else. Maya's return to serious training revealed how much she had missed the structured violence and controlled aggression that boxing provided. Her technique had remained sharp despite months away from formal instruction, muscle memory preserving the combinations and defensive patterns that Coach Rodriguez's predecessor in Denver had drilled into her through countless hours of repetition. But her timing and conditioning needed work, requiring her to rebuild the physical and mental stamina that competitive boxing demanded. The heavy bag work that became central to Maya's training routine served multiple purposes beyond simple conditioning. Each session allowed her to channel the frustration and anger that accumulated from watching Tyler Morrison's systematic cruelty at school, transforming negative emotions into productive physical exertion. The rhythmic percussion of her gloves against leather provided a meditation of sorts, clearing her mind of the day's accumulated stress while reinforcing the technical precision that made her punches devastatingly effective despite her relatively small frame. Coach Rodriguez quickly recognized that Maya's fighting style was naturally suited to counterpunching, the tactical approach favored by fighters who preferred to let opponents commit to attacks before responding with precisely timed combinations. Her defensive skills were exceptional for someone her age, showing an intuitive understanding of distance and timing that allowed her to avoid punishment while creating opportunities for devastating responses. Her punching power was surprising for her size, generated through perfect technique and explosive hip rotation rather than brute strength. But what truly impressed Coach Rodriguez was Maya's mental approach to training and competition. She absorbed instruction like a sponge, implementing corrections immediately and permanently rather than requiring constant reinforcement. Her sparring sessions demonstrated the rare combination of controlled aggression and strategic thinking that marked natural fighters, someone who could remain calm under pressure while identifying and exploiting openings in opponents' defenses. She never allowed ego or emotion to override tactical considerations, even when facing larger and more experienced training partners. The gym became Maya's refuge from the social complexities of Riverside Falls High School, a place where her value was measured by effort and improvement rather than family connections or social status. Coach Rodriguez's philosophy emphasized boxing as character development rather than mere physical conditioning, teaching students that the discipline required for serious training translated into other areas of life. The mental toughness developed through countless rounds of sparring and bag work built confidence that extended far beyond the gym's walls. Maya's training sessions typically lasted 2 hours, beginning with stretching and conditioning work before progressing to technical instruction and bag work. She preferred evening sessions when the gym was less crowded, allowing her to focus on skill development without the social dynamics that came with larger groups. Coach Rodriguez often stayed late to provide individual instruction, recognizing Maya's potential and dedication while respecting her preference for privacy about her boxing background. The physical transformation that resulted from resumed serious training was subtle but significant, with Maya's already athletic build becoming more defined and powerful through targeted conditioning work. Her hands, always quick and precise, developed the kind of speed that made her combinations blur together when delivered at full intensity. Her footwork improved to the point where she could circle opponents while maintaining perfect balance and positioning, setting up angles for attacks while staying just outside their effective range. More importantly, the mental discipline that boxing required began affecting other areas of Maya's life. The confidence that came from knowing she could protect herself physically translated into a quiet self-assurance that made her less concerned about fitting in socially at school. She still maintained her strategy of avoiding attention from Tyler Morrison's group, but her motivation shifted from fear to tactical consideration, understanding that the time for confrontation would come when she chose it, rather than when circumstances forced it upon her. Tyler Morrison's reign over Riverside Falls High School operated with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine, built on generations of family influence and maintained through a carefully calibrated system of rewards and punishments that kept the entire student body aligned with his interests. His power base extended far beyond the typical popularity that might elevate a star athlete in other schools, rooted instead in the deep institutional connections that made challenging him a potentially life-altering mistake for anyone foolish enough to try. The Morrison family's control over local law enforcement created a protective bubble around Tyler that extended into every corner of Riverside Falls society. Sheriff Robert Morrison had inherited his position from his father, who had inherited it from his father before him, creating a dynasty that treated the badge as family property rather than public trust. This generational authority meant that Tyler's mistakes disappeared before they could become problems. Witnesses developed selective amnesia when questioned about his behavior, and victims learned quickly that seeking official help would only result in additional harassment dressed up as thorough investigation. Tyler's understanding of his protected status had shaped his personality from childhood, creating someone who viewed other people as either useful assets or entertaining obstacles to be overcome. His approach to social dominance relied on psychological manipulation rather than crude physical intimidation, preferring to destroy his targets through systematic campaigns that left them isolated and helpless, while maintaining his own image as a charismatic leader who simply attracted loyalty naturally. The sophistication of his methods made him particularly dangerous, especially to newcomers who might mistake his surface charm for genuine kindness. His inner circle had been carefully selected for complementary skills and family connections that enhanced the group's overall power. Jake Sullivan brought technological expertise and access to his father's extensive business network, making him invaluable for gathering intelligence on potential targets and coordinating the kind of behind-the-scenes pressure that could destroy someone's family economically. Connor Hayes provided financial leverage through his family's bank, which held mortgages and business loans for half the families in town, creating opportunities for subtle economic warfare against anyone who crossed Tyler's interests. Austin Miller served as the group's historian and strategist, his grandfather's legacy as the previous sheriff, providing institutional memory about which families could be pressured and which ones possessed the connections to fight back effectively. Madison Wells occupied a unique position within Tyler's power structure, functioning as both romantic partner and strategic asset, whose social media influence could amplify their campaigns beyond the physical boundaries of Riverside Falls. Her Instagram account boasted over 15,000 followers, a significant number for someone from a town of 12,000, built through carefully curated content that showcased the lifestyle and connections that made her the envy of teenage girls throughout the region. Her posts regularly featured expensive clothes, exotic vacation destinations, and exclusive events that demonstrated the Wells family's wealth, while establishing Madison as someone whose approval carried tangible social benefits. But Madison's real value to Tyler lay in her understanding of how modern teenagers consumed and shared information, particularly the way that social media platforms could be weaponized to destroy reputations and isolate targets from potential support networks. She had mastered the art of plausible deniability, creating anonymous accounts and coordinating with friends to share embarrassing content in ways that made tracking the original source nearly impossible. Her attacks were designed to seem organic rather than orchestrated, building on existing insecurities and social divisions to create the impression that her victims were simply unpopular rather than being systematically destroyed. The group's methods had been refined through years of practice on a series of victims who had learned too late that crossing Tyler Morrison carried consequences that extended far beyond typical high school social drama. Their campaigns typically began with intelligence gathering, using their various family connections and social networks to identify potential vulnerabilities in their chosen targets. Financial struggles, family problems, academic difficulties, and social insecurities all became ammunition in carefully planned psychological warfare designed to isolate victims and break their will to resist. Tyler's approach to selecting targets followed a calculated pattern that minimized risk while maximizing the psychological impact on the broader student body. He preferred victims who lacked strong family connections within the community, understanding that parents with local influence could potentially challenge his actions through official channels or social pressure. Students from single-parent households, families facing economic hardship, or recent transplants to Riverside Falls all represented ideal targets because their limited support networks made retaliation unlikely and escape impossible. The systematic destruction of Alex Thompson had served as both entertainment and education for Tyler's group, demonstrating their methods while sending a clear message to other students about the consequences of challenging their authority. Alex's mistake had been correcting Tyler during a history class discussion about local mining operations, providing accurate information that contradicted Tyler's confident but factually incorrect statements about his great-grandfather's role in the region's development. The correction had been polite and well-sourced, but it had challenged Tyler's intellectual authority in front of classmates and a teacher, creating a public humiliation that demanded proportional response. The retaliation campaign against Alex had showcased the group's ability to coordinate attacks across multiple fronts simultaneously. Jake Sullivan had used his technological skills to create fake social media accounts that shared embarrassing photos and personal information, while Connor Hayes had leveraged his family's financial connections to spread rumors about the Thompson family's mounting debts and his father's unemployment struggles. Austin Miller had contributed historical context about previous families who had fallen from grace in Riverside Falls, creating a narrative that positioned Alex's destruction as inevitable rather than targeted. Madison's role in Alex's destruction had been particularly cruel, using her understanding of teenage social dynamics to exploit the victim's existing insecurities about his family's reduced circumstances. Her social media posts had featured subtle mockery disguised as concern, sharing photos of Alex's second-hand clothes and outdated technology while expressing sympathy for families struggling with economic hardship. The posts had been carefully crafted to appear supportive while actually highlighting Alex's otherness and encouraging her followers to view him with pity rather than respect. The campaign's culmination had required cooperation from Sheriff Morrison's office, with evidence of stolen ski equipment appearing in Alex's locker just before a carefully timed tip brought school security to investigate. The planted evidence had been provided by Jake Sullivan's family business, items that were later discovered missing from their inventory, creating a paper trail that appeared to support Alex's guilt while protecting the real perpetrators from suspicion. Sheriff Morrison's investigation had been perfunctory, focusing on Alex's financial motivations for theft rather than examining the convenient timing and suspicious circumstances surrounding the discovery. Tyler's satisfaction with Alex's destruction had been enhanced by the broader impact on the student body, as other potential troublemakers absorbed the lesson about challenging his authority. Teachers who might have been tempted to support students against Tyler's group saw how quickly official investigations could turn against those who lacked proper connections. Parents who might have complained about their children's treatment learned that Sheriff Morrison's office was more likely to investigate the complainants than the complaints, creating a climate of fear that extended far beyond the high school walls. The success of their systematic approach had made Tyler's group increasingly bold in their selection of targets and their methods of attack. Recent campaigns had included spreading rumors about a sophomore girl's alleged promiscuity after she declined Tyler's romantic advances, orchestrating the social isolation of a junior boy whose academic achievements threatened Tyler's class rank, and coordinating economic pressure against a family whose restaurant had refused to provide free catering for one of Tyler's parties. Each victory reinforced their sense of invincibility while demonstrating to potential victims that resistance was futile. Tyler's personal psychology had been shaped by years of unchallenged authority and instant gratification, creating someone who viewed obstacles as temporary inconveniences rather than genuine limitations. His expectation of immediate compliance had been reinforced by parents who confused enablement with support, teachers who mistook his confidence for leadership potential, and community members who treated his family name as a guarantee of good character. The combination of inherited privilege and systematic reinforcement had produced someone who genuinely believed that rules existed for other people, while his own desires represented the natural order of things. His athletic success had provided additional validation for Tyler's worldview, with football victories serving as proof that he was naturally superior to his peers in competition and leadership. The physical demands of playing quarterback had given him genuine confidence in his strength and coordination, while the strategic aspects of the position had reinforced his belief in his intellectual superiority over teammates and opponents alike. The adulation he received from local media and college recruiters had further inflated his ego while providing tangible evidence that his privileged position was earned rather than inherited. But Tyler's most dangerous characteristic was his inability to recognize genuine threats to his authority until they had already begun undermining his power base. His experience with victims who submitted quickly to psychological pressure had left him unprepared for opponents who might fight back effectively while his reliance on family connections had made him overconfident about his ability to escape consequences for escalating behavior. These blind spots would prove crucial when he finally encountered someone who possessed both the skills to resist his attacks and the strategic thinking necessary to turn his own methods against him. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test every assumption Tyler Morrison had made about power, privilege, and the natural order of Riverside Falls High School. His systematic approach to destroying opponents had created a perfect laboratory for measuring his methods against someone trained in actual combat, while his psychological need for dominance would prevent him from backing down even when faced with clear evidence that he had chosen the wrong target. The collision between Tyler's inherited authority and Maya Chen's earned skills would determine not just their individual fates, but the future of every vulnerable student who had learned to live in fear of crossing the sheriff's son. The collision between Maya Chen and Tyler Morrison began not with the dramatic confrontation that would eventually define both their fates, but with a seemingly insignificant moment during third-period chemistry class, when Maya made the mistake of demonstrating knowledge that Tyler couldn't match. Dr. Patricia Williams, the chemistry teacher who had spent 15 years trying to make molecular structures interesting to teenagers more concerned with social media than scientific principles, had posed a complex question about chemical bonding that left most of the class staring blankly at their textbooks. Maya's hand had risen almost involuntarily, her mind automatically processing the problem through the analytical framework that boxing had taught her to apply to complex situations. The answer she provided was not only correct but demonstrated a depth of understanding that impressed Dr. Williams and irritated Tyler Morrison, who had been preparing to offer his own confident but incorrect response. For someone accustomed to being the smartest person in any room, watching a quiet transfer student casually outperform him in front of 25 classmates represented the kind of public diminishment that demanded immediate correction. The incident might have been forgotten if Maya had possessed the social awareness to deflect attention from her academic abilities, perhaps by making self-deprecating comments about lucky guesses or expressing surprise at getting the answer right. Instead, she had simply returned to her note-taking with the same focused intensity she brought to everything else, apparently oblivious to the way Tyler's jaw had tightened and his friends had exchanged meaningful glances. Her failure to acknowledge the social significance of outshining the class's acknowledged leader marked her as either remarkably naive or dangerously confident, both of which represented threats to Tyler's carefully maintained image of intellectual superiority. Tyler's initial response had been measured and subtle, beginning with casual comments about Maya's antisocial behavior and her family's obvious financial struggles. He'd made jokes about her secondhand clothes and her part-time job at Mountain Grounds, suggesting that someone who needed to work for coffee money probably didn't belong in advanced placement classes with students whose families could afford proper educational support. The comments were delivered with Tyler's characteristic charm, framed as concerned observations about class dynamics rather than personal attacks, making them difficult to challenge without appearing oversensitive or defensive. But Maya's failure to respond to these initial probes with the expected submission or emotional breakdown had only intensified Tyler's interest in her destruction. Her calm acceptance of his mockery, combined with her continued academic performance and apparent indifference to social hierarchies, suggested that she either didn't understand the rules governing behavior at Riverside Falls High School or believed herself exempt from them. Both possibilities represented challenges to Tyler's authority that required increasingly direct responses to clarify the natural order of their shared environment. The escalation had accelerated when Maya committed the unforgivable sin of helping David Kim with a chemistry problem that Tyler had deliberately provided incorrect information about during a study session. David, a quiet Korean-American student whose immigrant parents ran a small grocery store on the edge of town, had become one of Tyler's favorite targets because his academic success threatened to expose the intellectual mediocrity that Tyler disguised through confident presentation and family connections. Tyler's sabotage of David's studies served dual purposes, protecting his class rank while demonstrating his power to destroy anyone who might challenge his position as the school's natural leader. Maya's intervention had been characteristically direct and devastating to Tyler's scheme. She had simply approached David after witnessing his confusion over Tyler's deliberately misleading explanation, offered the correct information with supporting evidence from their textbook, and moved on without dramatic confrontation or acknowledgement of Tyler's deception. The simplicity of her action had made Tyler's manipulative behavior appear petty and obvious by contrast. while her casual dismissal of his authority had suggested that she viewed him as irrelevant rather than intimidating. The public nature of Maya's correction had required Tyler to respond more aggressively than he might have preferred, since allowing her defiance to go unchallenged would encourage other students to question his methods and authority. His retaliation had taken the form of spreading rumors about Maya's family background, specifically focusing on her father's death and her mother's financial struggles, as evidence that the Chen family represented the kind of outsiders who brought their problems to Riverside Falls and expected the community to solve them. Tyler's research into Maya's background had been facilitated by his father's access to police reports and medical records, providing him with intimate details about Dr. Chen's malpractice lawsuit and the family's subsequent financial collapse. The information had been carefully leaked through Jake Sullivan's social media networks, presented as concerned observations about families who moved to small towns to escape their problems rather than face them responsibly. The campaign had been designed to isolate Maya by positioning her family as potentially dangerous outsiders whose presence threatened the stability and values that made Riverside Falls special. But Maya's response to these attacks had been unlike anything Tyler had encountered in his previous campaigns against resistant targets. Instead of breaking down emotionally or becoming defensive about her family's circumstances, she had simply continued her daily routine with the same quiet intensity that had marked her behavior since arriving in Riverside Falls. Her apparent indifference to Tyler's psychological warfare had been more unsettling than any direct confrontation might have been, suggesting that she possessed either remarkable emotional control or complete ignorance of the social dynamics that govern teenage behavior. The failure of Tyler's standard intimidation tactics had forced him to escalate his methods while simultaneously conducting more thorough intelligence gathering about Maya's background and potential vulnerabilities. His investigation had revealed her employment at Mountain Grounds Coffee Shop, her after-school visits to Iron Will Boxing Academy, and her sister Lily's involvement in various school activities that could potentially be disrupted through coordinated pressure. The information had provided multiple potential pressure points for future attacks, while confirming Tyler's suspicion that Maya's confidence stemmed from some form of physical training that made her less susceptible to typical psychological intimidation. Tyler's decision to target Maya directly rather than working through her sister or threatening her family's economic stability had been influenced by his growing obsession with proving his dominance over someone who had consistently refused to acknowledge his authority. The challenge she represented had become personal in a way that transcended his usual methodical approach to destroying obstacles, creating an emotional investment in her destruction that clouded his normally calculated tactical thinking. The planning phase for Tyler's most ambitious harassment campaign had involved extensive coordination with his inner circle, each member contributing their specialized skills and family resources to ensure maximum impact. Jake Sullivan had been assigned to develop technological components of the attack, including fake social media accounts, coordinated harassment campaigns, and digital documentation that could be used to frame Maya for various infractions. Connor Hayes had been tasked with exploring economic pressure points through his family's banking connections, investigating whether Dr. Chen's medical practice or the family's apartment lease could be threatened through financial manipulation. Austin Miller had contributed historical research about previous families who had been successfully driven from Riverside Falls through community pressure, providing tactical frameworks that could be adapted to Maya's specific circumstances. His grandfather's stories about maintaining order during his tenure as sheriff had included detailed accounts of how problematic families could be encouraged to relocate through strategic application of social and economic pressure, lessons that Tyler intended to apply with modern technological enhancements. Madison Wells had been assigned the crucial role of manufacturing social consensus around Maya's destruction, using her substantial social media influence to create the impression that the entire student body supported Tyler's campaign rather than simply feared opposing it. Her posts had begun featuring subtle references to students who didn't appreciate Riverside Falls' values and traditions, building a narrative framework that would justify increasingly aggressive actions as community self-defense rather than targeted harassment. The first major escalation had occurred during lunch period when Tyler approached Maya's table with the kind of theatrical confidence designed to draw maximum attention from surrounding students. His opening gambit had been a mock-friendly invitation for Maya to join his group's table, delivered loudly enough for everyone in the cafeteria to hear while containing subtle mockery that his supporters would recognize and appreciate. The invitation had been designed to create a no-win situation for Maya, since accepting would subject her to public humiliation while declining would appear antisocial and ungrateful. Maya's response had been characteristically unexpected, neither accepting Tyler's false invitation nor rejecting it with the kind of emotional reaction he had anticipated. Instead, she had thanked him politely for his consideration, while explaining that she preferred to use lunch period for studying, a response that managed to be both diplomatic and dismissive without providing ammunition for future attacks. Her calm delivery and reasonable explanation had made Tyler's theatrical gesture appear foolish by comparison, particularly since several teachers were within hearing distance and could appreciate the maturity of her response. The failure of his lunch period gambit had forced Tyler to escalate more quickly than he had initially planned, moving directly to personal attacks designed to provoke the kind of emotional breakdown that would justify more aggressive retaliation. His next approach had involved cornering Maya after chemistry class to deliver a carefully prepared monologue about her family's problems and her inappropriate behavior since arriving in Riverside Falls. The confrontation had been witnessed by several students, including David Kim and Emma Rodriguez, ensuring that Maya's response would be widely reported regardless of how she chose to handle Tyler's aggression. Tyler's verbal assault had been methodically designed to exploit every vulnerability his research had revealed, beginning with mockery of her family's financial struggles and escalating to cruel speculation about her father's death and her mother's professional failures. He had painted the Chen family's relocation to Riverside Falls as an attempt to escape consequences for their poor decisions, suggesting that Maya's academic performance was artificially inflated through previous school's pity for her family's circumstances rather than genuine intellectual ability. But the crown jewel of Tyler's attack had been his revelation that he knew about Maya's visits to Iron Will Boxing Academy, information he had framed as evidence of dangerous and antisocial tendencies that threatened other students' safety. He had suggested that someone who needed to learn violent skills was probably planning to use them, creating a narrative that would justify preemptive action against Maya while positioning himself as a concerned student leader protecting his classmates from potential harm. Maya's response to Tyler's most vicious psychological attack had been the moment when their conflict transcended typical high school drama and entered the realm of genuine warfare between fundamentally incompatible worldviews. Instead of breaking down or becoming defensive, Maya had listened to Tyler's entire tirade with the kind of focused attention she might give to an opponent's pre-fight trash talk, analyzing his techniques and emotional state while preparing her own tactical response. When Tyler finally finished his rehearsed destruction of her character and family, Maya had simply nodded thoughtfully and delivered a response that demonstrated why her boxing training had emphasized mental discipline as much as physical technique. She had thanked Tyler for clarifying his position and concerns, acknowledged that adjusting to new communities could be challenging for everyone involved, and expressed hope that they could find ways to coexist peacefully during their remaining time as classmates. The calm professionalism of Maya's response had been devastating to Tyler's emotional equilibrium precisely because it refused to engage with his attack on the terms he had established. By treating his cruel mockery as legitimate concerns worthy of thoughtful consideration, she had exposed the childish nature of his tactics while demonstrating a level of maturity that made him appear petulant and small by comparison. Her suggestion that their conflict represented mutual adjustment difficulties, rather than his deliberate campaign of harassment, had reframed the narrative in ways that protected her reputation while subtly undermining his. Tyler's fury at being outmaneuvered so completely had led to his first serious tactical error, abandoning his usual methodical approach in favor of immediate escalation designed to provoke the kind of dramatic confrontation that would justify using his family's institutional power to destroy Maya permanently. His decision to involve Madison Wells and his male supporters in a coordinated physical intimidation campaign represented a qualitative escalation that crossed lines he had previously been careful to avoid. The plan they developed had been designed to create a situation where Maya would be forced to either submit publicly to Tyler's authority or respond with violence that could be used to justify her expulsion and potential arrest. The scenario they constructed involved cornering Maya in a location where escape would be impossible, while ensuring that any physical contact would appear to originate from her rather than Tyler's group, protecting them from official consequences while documenting her aggressive behavior for future use. Tyler's selection of the school parking lot during after-school hours had been tactically sound, providing enough isolation to prevent immediate intervention by faculty while ensuring that security cameras would record whatever transpired. The timing had been coordinated with a basketball team meeting that would provide Tyler with an alibi while Jake Sullivan, Connor Hayes, and Austin Miller handled the actual confrontation. Madison Wells had been positioned to document everything through her social media accounts, ensuring that their version of events would be widely distributed before Maya could offer alternative narratives. The psychological component of their plan had involved Tyler's acquisition of a taser, a device his father had given him for personal protection, but which Tyler intended to use as an instrument of terror rather than self-defense. The electrical weapon represented an escalation beyond anything Tyler had previously employed against his victims, chosen specifically because the threat of electrocution would create the kind of primal fear that could break even strong-willed opponents while leaving minimal physical evidence of assault. Tyler's research into tasers had revealed their effectiveness as psychological weapons, since the visible electrical discharge and distinctive crackling sound created fear responses that were often more powerful than the actual physical effects of being shocked. His plan involved using the device to terrorize Maya into submission without necessarily making contact, understanding that the threat of electrocution would be sufficient to demonstrate his absolute power over her safety and well-being. The fatal flaw in Tyler's tactical thinking had been his assumption that Maya's boxing training represented nothing more than a fitness hobby rather than serious combat preparation, a misconception that would prove catastrophic when their carefully planned psychological warfare evolved into actual physical confrontation. His experience with victims who submitted quickly to intimidation had left him unprepared for someone trained to remain calm under pressure, while rapidly assessing threats and formulating tactical responses. Maya's years of sparring against larger and stronger opponents had taught her to recognize the specific body language and positioning that preceded violent attacks, skills that proved invaluable when Tyler's group finally made their move. Her ability to read aggressive intentions through subtle physical cues allowed her to prepare defensive responses while maintaining the appearance of casual awareness, preventing Tyler's group from recognizing that their intended victim was actually a highly trained predator waiting for them to commit to their attack. The evening of October 15th had brought an early mountain storm that left Riverside Falls High School's parking lot slick with rain and fallen leaves, creating atmospheric conditions that perfectly matched the dark intentions of Tyler Morrison and his carefully selected accomplices. Maya Chen had remained after school to complete a makeup chemistry exam, her dedication to academic excellence overriding the instinctive wariness that had kept her safe during her first weeks in this hostile environment. The extended daylight of earlier autumn had given way to the premature darkness of approaching winter, creating shadows that could conceal predators while providing cover for the kind of violence that thrived in isolation. Tyler's positioning near the school's main exit had been carefully calculated to intercept Maya, while maintaining plausible deniability about his presence in the area. His basketball practice had been scheduled to end 30 minutes earlier, providing sufficient time for him to change clothes and position himself without arousing suspicion from faculty members who might question why the sheriff's son was lurking around school grounds after hours. Jake Sullivan and Connor Hayes had been stationed near the parking lot's perimeter exits, ready to prevent Maya's escape while ensuring that any confrontation would appear spontaneous rather than premeditated. Austin Miller's role in the ambush had involved disabling the security cameras that monitored the parking lot's main areas, a task made possible by his intimate knowledge of the school's infrastructure gained through his father's maintenance contracts with the district. The temporary technical malfunction would be attributed to storm damage, providing Tyler's group with a window of opportunity to act without creating permanent evidence of their premeditation. Madison Wells had been assigned to document selected portions of the encounter through her personal phone, ensuring that their narrative would dominate social media before alternative versions could emerge. Maya's emergence from the school building had triggered the final phase of Tyler's plan, with each member of his group moving to predetermined positions while maintaining the casual postures of students coincidentally leaving school at the same time. The coordination required for their ambush demonstrated the kind of tactical planning that Tyler had learned from his father's stories about coordinating complex police operations, adapted for the unique requirements of teenage psychological warfare. The initial contact had appeared innocuous enough, with Tyler approaching Maya with the kind of false friendliness that had become his trademark when preparing to destroy someone. His opening comments about the weather and her late departure from school had been delivered with apparent concern for her safety, establishing a pretext for conversation while positioning himself between Maya and the most direct exit routes. His body language had radiated the casual confidence of someone accustomed to controlling conversations and outcomes, unaware that his intended victim was analyzing his positioning and intent with the professional assessment skills that serious boxing training had developed. Maya's immediate recognition of the tactical situation had been facilitated by Coach Rodriguez's emphasis on situational awareness and threat assessment, lessons that had been drilled into her through countless hours of instruction about managing confrontations outside the controlled environment of the boxing ring. Her years of sparring against opponents who attempted to disguise their intentions through deceptive movements had taught her to read genuine threats through subtle physical indicators that most people would miss entirely. Tyler's gradual escalation from false concern to veiled threats had followed the same pattern Maya had observed during his destruction of Alex Thompson and other victims, beginning with expressions of worry about her adjustment to Riverside Falls, before progressing to more direct challenges about her family's background and her own behavior. His comments about her mother's medical practice and the community's concerns about outsiders bringing problems to their peaceful town had been delivered with a kind of reasonable tone that made disagreement appear unreasonable while steadily increasing psychological pressure. But the critical moment had arrived when Tyler produced the taser from his jacket pocket, the device's distinctive shape immediately recognizable despite the dim lighting conditions in the parking lot. The weapon's appearance had represented a qualitative escalation beyond psychological intimidation into the realm of potential serious physical harm, crossing legal and moral boundaries that transformed their confrontation from harassment into assault with a deadly weapon. Tyler's confident handling of the device had suggested familiarity with its operation, while his theatrical display of its electrical discharge had been designed to create maximum psychological impact. The crackling sound of 50,000 volts had echoed across the empty parking lot like miniature thunder, accompanied by the distinctive blue-white light that made tasers effective instruments of terror even when not making contact with human targets. Tyler's smile during this demonstration had revealed the sadistic pleasure he derived from wielding absolute power over another person's safety, while his verbal threats about teaching Maya appropriate respect for established social hierarchies had confirmed his intention to use the weapon for torture rather than legitimate self-defense. Maya's response to Tyler's escalation had been informed by years of training in environments where split-second decisions could determine the difference between victory and serious injury, experience that had taught her to remain calm under extreme pressure while rapidly formulating tactical solutions to complex problems. Her assessment of the situation had revealed multiple disadvantages, including numerical inferiority, unfamiliar terrain, and limited escape routes, factors that would have overwhelmed someone without her specialized training and mental preparation. But Maya's boxing background had also provided crucial advantages that Tyler's group could not have anticipated, including superior physical conditioning, extensive experience with violent confrontations, and, most importantly, the kind of controlled aggression that allowed her to escalate to maximum violence instantly while maintaining tactical awareness and strategic thinking. Her years of sparring against larger opponents had taught her to use speed and precision to overcome strength disadvantages, while her training in counterpunching had developed the timing and distance management skills necessary to turn opponents' aggression against them. Tyler's decision to personally wield the taser rather than delegating that responsibility to one of his accomplices had been influenced by his psychological need to personally dominate Maya after her repeated refusals to acknowledge his authority. The weapon had provided him with the kind of absolute power that appealed to his narcissistic personality, offering the ability to inflict precise amounts of pain and terror while maintaining complete control over the situation's progression. His approach toward Maya with the activated taser had been deliberately slow and theatrical, designed to maximize her psychological suffering while demonstrating his complete authority over her physical safety. The fatal error in Tyler's tactical thinking had been his assumption that displaying the taser would create the kind of paralyzing fear that had characterized his previous victims' responses to intimidation, leaving Maya helpless and compliant while he decided how much suffering to inflict before allowing her to escape with appropriate psychological scars. His experience with students who submitted quickly to psychological pressure had left him unprepared for someone trained to function effectively under extreme stress, while maintaining the mental clarity necessary for complex tactical decision-making. Maya's movement when Tyler brought the taser within striking distance had been so sudden and explosive that several seconds passed before Tyler's group understood what had happened. Her initial step had been a classic boxing pivot that moved her offline from Tyler's advance while positioning her for a counterattack, followed immediately by a left hook that caught Tyler's extended arm with surgical precision. The impact had been carefully calculated to strike the nerve cluster in his forearm with sufficient force to cause immediate numbness and involuntary muscle relaxation, forcing him to drop the taser while creating an opening for follow-up techniques. The speed and accuracy of Maya's response had been the product of thousands of hours of repetitive training that had made defensive movements automatic rather than conscious, allowing her to react to threats faster than opponents could adjust their attacks. Her targeting of Tyler's weapon hand rather than his head or body had demonstrated the kind of tactical thinking that separated trained fighters from brawlers, prioritizing the elimination of immediate threats over the infliction of maximum damage. Tyler's shock at losing control of the taser had been compounded by the realization that Maya's movement had been far too fast and precise to be accidental or lucky, suggesting that she possessed genuine fighting skills rather than the basic self-defense training he had anticipated. His attempt to retrieve the fallen weapon had been reflexive rather than tactical, driven by desperation to regain the psychological advantage that the taser had provided rather than careful consideration of his strategic options. Maya's second technique had been a perfectly executed right straight that caught Tyler squarely in the solar plexus as he bent forward to reach for the taser, the impact calculated to cause maximum disruption to his breathing and balance, while avoiding the kind of head trauma that could result in serious legal consequences for her. The punch had been delivered with the full power generated by proper hip rotation and weight transfer, techniques that Coach Rodriguez had drilled into her through countless hours of heavy bag work and focus mitt training. The effect of Maya's body shot on Tyler had been immediate and devastating, forcing him to double over as his diaphragm spasmed and his lungs struggled to process oxygen. The technique had been specifically chosen to incapacitate without causing permanent injury, reflecting Maya's training in the kind of controlled violence that separated professional fighters from street fighters. Her ability to maintain tactical discipline while under extreme stress had been the product of years of sparring against opponents who had tested her mental toughness and technical skill under increasingly challenging conditions. Jake Sullivan's attempt to intervene had been predictable given his position as Tyler's primary lieutenant and his family's expectation that he would support their allies during confrontations. His movement toward Maya from her left side had been telegraphed through his preparatory positioning and aggressive body language, providing her with sufficient warning to prepare appropriate defensive responses. His lack of training in actual combat had made his attack clumsy and easily countered by someone with Maya's technical skills and tactical awareness. Maya's response to Jake's charge had been a classic sidestep, followed by a short uppercut that caught him under the chin with enough force to snap his head back and disrupt his balance without causing the kind of serious injury that could result in permanent damage. The technique had been delivered with the timing and precision that came from years of practicing counterpunching against training partners who attempted to overwhelm her through aggressive rushing attacks. Her ability to generate significant power over short distances had been developed through specialized training that emphasized efficiency and economy of motion rather than telegraphed haymaker punches. Connor Hayes and Austin Miller's hesitation to immediately join the attack had been influenced by their shock at witnessing Tyler and Jake's swift defeats at the hands of someone they had dismissed as an easy target. Their tactical paralysis had provided Maya with crucial seconds to assess her situation and prepare for the coordinated assault that would follow once Tyler's remaining supporters overcame their initial surprise and recognized the need for immediate action to prevent complete humiliation. The fallen taser had created a tactical wildcard that could potentially shift the confrontation's balance depending on who managed to retrieve and employ it effectively. Maya's positioning relative to the weapon had been influenced by her understanding that electrical devices could be used against their original wielders if properly applied, while Tyler's desperate attempts to regain control had been driven by his recognition that losing the psychological advantage provided by superior weaponry would leave him vulnerable to someone who had clearly demonstrated superior fighting skills. Madison Wells's role as documentarian had become complicated by the rapid evolution of events that contradicted the narrative she had been prepared to promote through her social media channels. Her phone's camera had captured Tyler's initial approach and threats, but had missed the crucial moments when Maya's defensive techniques had neutralized the taser threat and incapacitated Tyler himself. The footage she possessed showed Tyler wielding a weapon against an apparently defenseless girl, evidence that could potentially support criminal charges against him rather than the self-defense narrative that their plan had been designed to establish. The sound of approaching sirens in the distance had created additional pressure for rapid resolution of the confrontation, since police intervention would inevitably involve Sheriff Morrison's response to a situation involving his son and a dangerous weapon. The approaching authorities represented both opportunity and threat for all participants, since the eventual investigation would depend heavily on physical evidence and witness testimony that could be influenced by whoever controlled the narrative's initial presentation. Maya's tactical decision to end the confrontation quickly rather than prolonging it had been influenced by her understanding that extended fighting would increase the likelihood of serious injuries that could result in criminal charges, regardless of who had initiated the violence. Her training had emphasized the importance of using minimum necessary force to neutralize threats, while avoiding the kind of excessive damage that could transform legitimate self-defense into criminal assault. The approaching sirens had added urgency to her need for decisive action that would leave no doubt about who had been the aggressor and who had been defending themselves. Tyler's final desperate lunge for the taser had been intercepted by Maya's most devastating technique of the encounter, a left hook to his temple that had been calculated to cause immediate unconsciousness without permanent brain damage. The punch had been delivered with the kind of precision that came from years of training under Coach Rodriguez's supervision, targeting the specific pressure point that would cause temporary incapacitation, while minimizing the risk of lasting harm. Tyler's collapse had been immediate and complete, his body going limp as his nervous system temporarily shut down in response to the carefully applied trauma. The sudden silence that followed Tyler's unconsciousness had been broken only by Connor Hayes and Austin Miller's heavy breathing as they processed the complete reversal of their expected outcome. Their leader lay motionless on the wet asphalt, while Jake Sullivan sat against a nearby car holding his aching jaw, and the quiet transfer student they had planned to terrorize stood calmly among the evidence of their defeat. The taser lay forgotten in a puddle of rainwater, its electrical charge spent and its psychological power neutralized by someone who had proven immune to intimidation. Maya's assessment of the scene had revealed the need for immediate action to control the narrative before police arrived and began their investigation. Her understanding of small-town politics and Tyler's family connections had made it clear that the initial police response would be biased toward protecting the sheriff's son, regardless of the evidence. Her tactical thinking had shifted from physical combat to legal and social warfare, requiring different skills but the same strategic mindset that had allowed her to defeat Tyler's ambush. The arrival of Officer Patricia Williams, the school's security guard who had been working late and heard the commotion, had provided Maya with an opportunity to establish the official record before Sheriff Morrison could arrive and potentially influence the investigation. Officer Williams's reputation for fairness and professional integrity had made her an ideal first responder from Maya's perspective, since her report would carry weight with district attorneys and other authorities who might review the case. Maya's decision to immediately surrender herself to Officer Williams while explaining the circumstances of the confrontation had demonstrated the kind of tactical thinking that extended beyond physical combat into legal and political strategy. Her calm demeanor and cooperative attitude had contrasted sharply with the chaos surrounding Tyler's unconscious form and his accomplice's obvious distress, creating an immediate impression that she had been defending herself rather than initiating violence. The recovery of the taser from the parking lot puddle had provided crucial physical evidence supporting Maya's account of events, since Tyler's fingerprints on the weapon would prove his role as the aggressor, while the device's activation history could potentially demonstrate his intent to use it against her. Officer Williams's careful documentation of the scene had been facilitated by Maya's cooperation and her detailed explanation of the sequence of events that had led to the confrontation. Tyler's gradual return to consciousness had been accompanied by confusion and disorientation that made his initial statements to police inconsistent and unreliable. particularly when compared to Maya's clear and detailed account of his threats and assaults with the taser. His visible injuries and disheveled condition had supported the narrative that he had been defeated in combat rather than being the victim of an unprovoked attack, while his accomplices' reluctance to speak coherently had suggested their awareness that their actions could not be easily justified. The arrival of Sheriff Morrison 30 minutes later had created the kind of political tension that Maya had anticipated, with Tyler's father immediately attempting to control the investigation's direction, while Officer Williams maintained her professional objectivity, despite obvious pressure to modify her preliminary findings. The conflict between family loyalty and professional duty had been evident in Sheriff Morrison's behavior, as he struggled to protect his son while maintaining the appearance of impartial law enforcement. Maya's request for immediate medical attention despite her lack of visible injuries had been a tactical decision designed to create official documentation of her condition and mental state immediately following the attack, evidence that could prove crucial if Tyler's family attempted to portray her as the primary aggressor. The paramedics' examination had revealed minor abrasions and elevated stress hormones consistent with someone who had been forced to defend herself against multiple attackers, findings that supported her version of events while contradicting any alternative narratives. The discovery of Madison Wells's phone footage had provided additional complications for Tyler's group, since the video clearly showed him wielding the taser and making threatening statements toward Maya before the physical confrontation began. Madison's attempt to edit or delete the incriminating portions had been prevented by Officer Williams's immediate seizure of the device as evidence, ensuring that the complete record would be available for legal proceedings. Dr. Chen's arrival at the scene had added another layer of complexity to the situation, as Tyler's father found himself forced to deal with a medical professional whose training and credentials commanded respect within the community. Dr. Chen's calm assessment of her daughter's condition and her professional documentation of Maya's minor injuries had provided additional evidence supporting the self-defense narrative, while demonstrating the kind of family stability that contradicted Tyler's previous rumors about the Chen family's problems. The decision to transport Tyler to Riverside Falls General Hospital for evaluation of his head injury had been influenced by liability concerns rather than medical necessity, since Maya's precisely delivered punch had been calculated to cause temporary unconsciousness without lasting damage. The hospital visit had provided Dr. Chen with professional obligations to treat the patient despite his attack on her daughter, demonstrating the kind of ethical behavior that impressed Officer Williams and other observers, while further undermining Tyler's character assassination campaign. The preliminary investigation's findings had been clear enough to justify charges against Tyler for assault with a deadly weapon, while Maya's actions had been deemed justified self-defense under Colorado law's provisions for protecting oneself against imminent threats of serious bodily harm. The physical evidence, witness statements, and Madison's inadvertent video documentation had created an overwhelming case against Tyler that even his father's influence could not easily dismiss or minimize. The broader implications of Tyler's defeat had begun to ripple through Riverside Falls High School's social structure before the participants had even left the parking lot, as news of the confrontation spread through social media and text messaging networks faster than Sheriff Morrison could hope to control. Students who had been terrorized by Tyler's group for years had begun to understand that their tormentor was not invincible, while potential future victims had gained hope that resistance was possible even against seemingly overwhelming odds. Emma Rodriguez had arrived at the scene in time to witness the aftermath and document additional evidence through her journalism training, understanding that the story represented more than just a simple fight between students. Her investigation into Tyler's previous victims had prepared her to recognize the significance of someone finally standing up effectively to his systematic harassment, while her connections throughout the school community had positioned her to gather testimonies from other students who had suffered under Tyler's reign of terror. The involvement of Coach Marcus Rodriguez, who arrived at the hospital after being contacted by Dr. Chen, had provided Maya with additional support while demonstrating the boxing community's commitment to protecting their members when they were forced to defend themselves outside the gym. His professional assessment of Maya's techniques and his testimony about her training and character had carried weight with investigators who understood the difference between trained fighters defending themselves and untrained individuals engaging in casual violence. Lily Chen's response to learning about her sister's confrontation had revealed the depth of Tyler's intimidation campaign, as she admitted to weeks of harassment and threats that she had hidden from her family to avoid creating additional stress during their difficult adjustment to life in Riverside Falls. Her testimony had provided evidence of Tyler's systematic targeting of the Chen family, while demonstrating the courage required for Maya's decision to finally resist, rather than continuing to endure escalating abuse. The legal proceedings that followed had been complicated by Tyler's family connections but ultimately determined by the overwhelming evidence supporting Maya's account of events. The district attorney's decision to prosecute Tyler for assault with a deadly weapon had been influenced by the clear documentation of his premeditation and the serious nature of deploying a taser against an unarmed student, charges that carried potential felony consequences despite his family's political influence. Tyler's expulsion from Riverside Falls High School had been inevitable once the full scope of his harassment campaign became public knowledge, with Emma Rodriguez's investigation revealing a pattern of systematic abuse that school administrators could no longer ignore or minimize. His removal from the football team had ended his college recruitment prospects while sending a clear message to other students about the consequences of using family connections to escape accountability for criminal behavior. The transformation of Riverside Falls High School's social dynamics had been gradual but profound, as students who had been terrorized by Tyler's regime began to speak openly about their experiences while supporting one another in ways that had been impossible under his system of intimidation and isolation. Maya's example had demonstrated that resistance was possible even against seemingly overwhelming odds, inspiring others to stand up against harassment and creating a culture where bullying behavior faced immediate consequences rather than tacit approval. Coach Rodriguez's expansion of Iron Will Boxing Academy's youth programs had been directly inspired by Maya's experience, as he recognized the need to provide self-defense training and confidence building for students who might face similar situations. His philosophy of using boxing training to develop mental toughness and personal integrity had attracted students from throughout the region, creating a network of young people committed to protecting themselves and others from predatory behavior. The legal resolution of Tyler's case had included probation and community service requirements that forced him to confront the consequences of his actions, while providing restitution to his victims, an outcome that balanced accountability with the possibility of rehabilitation. His family's political influence had protected him from more serious penalties, but his father's eventual resignation from the sheriff's position had demonstrated that even powerful families faced consequences when their protection of criminal behavior became too obvious to ignore. Maya's decision to remain at Riverside Falls High School for her senior year had been influenced by her understanding that leaving would abandon other vulnerable students to future predators while failing to complete the work of creating lasting change in the school's culture. Her continued presence had served as a reminder that bullying behavior would face effective resistance while providing inspiration for students who needed examples of courage and determination. The establishment of a student advocacy program based on Maya's experience had created institutional mechanisms for addressing harassment and abuse before they escalated to the level of violence, providing support systems for vulnerable students while educating the broader school community about the signs and consequences of predatory behavior. Emma Rodriguez's leadership of this program had combined her journalistic skills with her passion for social justice, creating documentation and awareness that made future cover-ups impossible. Dr. Chen's integration into Riverside Falls' medical community had been accelerated by her professional handling of the crisis surrounding her daughter's confrontation with Tyler, as her colleagues recognized her clinical skills and ethical standards, while appreciating her family's courage in standing up to corruption and abuse. Her success had provided stability for the Chen family while demonstrating that newcomers could find acceptance in small communities when they contributed positively to the common good. The ripple effects of Maya's resistance had extended far beyond Riverside Falls High School, inspiring similar advocacy efforts in other schools throughout the region, while providing a model for how individual courage could create systemic change when combined with strategic thinking and community support. Her story had become a teaching tool for self-defense instructors and youth advocates who understood that physical skills were only one component of the comprehensive approach required to address modern bullying and harassment. The final confrontation between Maya Chen and Tyler Morrison had lasted less than 5 minutes, but its consequences had reshaped an entire community's understanding of power, privilege, and the responsibility to protect the vulnerable from those who would abuse their authority. The transformation that followed had been neither immediate nor complete, but it had been irreversible, creating new expectations about accountability and resistance that would influence how conflicts were resolved for years to come. Maya's emergence as an unlikely leader within Riverside Falls High School had been facilitated by her refusal to exploit her victory over Tyler for personal gain or social advancement. Instead of seeking popularity or recognition, she had focused on supporting other students who had suffered under Tyler's regime while working quietly to strengthen the institutional mechanisms that could prevent future abuse. Her approach had emphasized collective empowerment rather than individual heroism, understanding that lasting change required broad participation rather than dependence on exceptional individuals. The counseling sessions that had been mandated for all students involved in the parking lot confrontation had revealed the depth of psychological damage that Tyler's systematic harassment had inflicted on the broader school community. Students who had never been directly targeted had still been affected by the climate of fear and intimidation that Tyler's reign had created, developing anxiety and depression symptoms that interfered with their academic performance and social development. The therapeutic interventions that followed had provided healing opportunities while documenting the scope of harm that unchecked bullying could cause. Madison Wells's social media empire had crumbled almost overnight as her followers abandoned accounts associated with Tyler's harassment campaigns, understanding that continued association could result in their own social media presence being scrutinized for evidence of complicity in his abuse. Her attempt to rebrand herself as a victim of Tyler's manipulation had been undermined by the extensive documentation of her active participation in destroying other students' reputations and social connections. The loss of her online influence had been particularly devastating for someone whose identity had been built around digital popularity and lifestyle curation. Jake Sullivan, Connor Hayes, and Austin Miller had faced varying degrees of consequences based on their level of participation in Tyler's activities and their willingness to cooperate with investigations into his broader pattern of harassment. Jake's technological skills had made him valuable to prosecutors seeking to understand the digital components of Tyler's campaigns, while Connor's family's banking connections had provided insights into the economic pressure tactics that had been employed against some victims' families. Austin's historical knowledge about previous harassment campaigns had helped investigators understand how Tyler's methods had evolved over time. The revelation that Tyler's behavior had been enabled by a network of adults who had chosen to ignore or minimize his actions had led to broader accountability measures throughout Riverside Falls' institutional structure. Teachers who had witnessed harassment but failed to report it faced professional development requirements focused on recognizing and addressing bullying behavior, while administrators who had dismissed complaints faced scrutiny from district officials concerned about liability and public relations consequences. Sheriff Morrison's resignation had been accompanied by a comprehensive review of his department's handling of complaints involving his son and other connected families, revealing a pattern of biased investigations and selective enforcement that had undermined public trust in local law enforcement. The incoming sheriff, elected on a platform of transparency and community policing, had implemented new protocols for handling complaints involving department members' families, while establishing independent oversight mechanisms to prevent future conflicts of interest. The civil lawsuits filed by Tyler's victims had been settled out of court for undisclosed amounts, but the legal proceedings had created public records, documenting the systematic nature of his harassment, while establishing precedents for holding wealthy families accountable for their children's abusive behavior. The settlements had included funding for anti-bullying programs and victim support services that would benefit the broader community, while ensuring that future families would face real financial consequences for enabling their children's predatory conduct. Maya's boxing training had evolved under Coach Rodriguez's guidance to incorporate the lessons learned from her real-world application of combat skills, with increased emphasis on the legal and ethical considerations that governed the use of force outside controlled sporting environments. Her sparring sessions had become teaching opportunities for other students learning to defend themselves, with Maya serving as both technical instructor and inspirational example of how training could provide confidence and capability when facing seemingly overwhelming odds. The documentary that Emma Rodriguez had produced about Tyler's harassment campaign and Maya's resistance had been distributed throughout the regional school system as an educational tool, providing administrators and students with concrete examples of how systematic abuse operated and how it could be effectively challenged. The film had won several student journalism awards while inspiring similar investigations at other schools, where comparable abuse had been hidden behind facades of tradition and athletic achievement. Lily Chen's emergence as a student advocate in her own right had been influenced by her sister's example, but had taken forms that reflected her own interests and abilities. Her work with freshman orientation programs had focused on helping new students understand their rights and resources, while building support networks that could prevent the kind of isolation that made students vulnerable to predators like Tyler. Her natural charisma and communication skills had made her effective at reaching students who might have been suspicious of more formal intervention programs. Dr. Chen's expansion of her medical practice to include mental health services had been motivated by her family's experience with the psychological impact of harassment and her recognition that Riverside Falls lacked adequate resources for treating trauma and anxiety disorders. Her collaboration with the school district to provide counseling services had created early intervention opportunities, while ensuring that students facing similar situations would have professional support rather than being forced to handle complex psychological challenges alone. The transformation of Iron Will Boxing Academy into a community center offering multiple self-defense disciplines had reflected Coach Rodriguez's understanding that different students needed different approaches to building confidence and capability. The addition of martial arts classes, conflict resolution workshops, and peer counseling programs had created a comprehensive resource for young people seeking to develop the mental and physical tools necessary for protecting themselves and others from abuse. Maya's college applications had been strengthened by her experience overcoming adversity and creating positive change within her community, with admissions officers recognizing the leadership qualities and personal integrity that her handling of the Tyler situation had demonstrated. Her essays about the importance of standing up to bullying while working for systemic change had resonated with institutions seeking students who could contribute to campus safety and social justice initiatives. The Memorial Scholarship established in honor of students who had been driven from Riverside Falls High School by Tyler's harassment had provided financial assistance for college while creating official recognition of the harm that had been done to previous victims. The fund had been supported by community donations and corporate sponsorships, demonstrating broad public support for accountability and healing while ensuring that Tyler's former victims would have opportunities for educational advancement despite the trauma they had endured. The policy changes implemented by the school district had included mandatory training for all staff members on recognizing and responding to harassment, establishment of anonymous reporting systems that bypassed potential conflicts of interest, and creation of student advocacy positions that provided peer support while connecting victims with appropriate resources. The reforms had been modeled on best practices from other districts, while incorporating specific lessons learned from the Tyler Morrison case. Tyler's eventual transfer to a military boarding school had been presented as an opportunity for character development and discipline, but had actually represented his family's recognition that he could no longer function within the Riverside Falls community without facing constant reminders of his disgrace and criminal behavior. The structured environment and professional supervision at his new school had provided safeguards against his continuing patterns of abuse while removing him from the community where his victims were healing and rebuilding their lives. The reunion of Alex Thompson with his former classmates had been facilitated by the revelation that his suspension and social exile had been based on fabricated evidence, leading to his reinstatement and public apology from school officials who had failed to investigate his claims of being framed. His return had provided closure for many students while demonstrating that Tyler's victims could reclaim their place in the community when truth replaced the narratives that had been constructed to justify their persecution. Maya's decision to pursue a college major combining social work and criminal justice had been influenced by her understanding that effective advocacy required knowledge of both individual psychology and institutional systems, preparation that would allow her to address the root causes of abuse rather than simply responding to its symptoms. Her internship opportunities with organizations combating domestic violence and youth harassment had provided practical experience while building networks that could support her future advocacy efforts. The establishment of a regional conference on youth harassment prevention had brought together educators, law enforcement officials, mental health professionals, and community leaders to share strategies and resources for creating safer environments for young people. Maya's keynote presentation about her experience had provided a powerful example of individual resistance while emphasizing the community support and institutional changes that had made lasting transformation possible. Coach Rodriguez's recognition as a community leader and role model had been formalized through awards from youth organizations and law enforcement agencies that appreciated his contribution to crime prevention and character development. His expansion of boxing programs into other communities had created a network of gyms committed to teaching self-defense skills while promoting the values of respect, discipline, and protection of the vulnerable. The academic research conducted by university psychology and criminology departments had used the Riverside Falls case as a study in the dynamics of institutional bullying and community resistance, generating publications that would inform future prevention and intervention efforts. Maya's participation in these studies had provided her with additional insights into the broader patterns of abuse while contributing to knowledge that could protect other young people facing similar situations. The media attention that had initially focused on the dramatic aspects of Maya's confrontation with Tyler had evolved into deeper coverage of the systemic issues that had enabled his behavior and the comprehensive approach required to address institutional harassment. National news programs and documentary filmmakers had recognized the story's significance as an example of how individual courage could catalyze broader social change when combined with strategic advocacy and community support. Maya's ongoing relationship with law enforcement training programs had provided opportunities for her to share insights about youth harassment with officers who would be responding to similar situations, helping them understand the complex dynamics involved while encouraging approaches that prioritized victim support over perpetrator protection. Her presentations had been particularly effective with officers who had children of their own and could appreciate the importance of creating safe school environments. The international attention that Maya's story had attracted had connected her with youth advocates from other countries facing comparable challenges with institutional bullying and abuse of power, creating cross-cultural exchanges of strategies and support that enriched her understanding of these issues as global rather than local phenomena. Her correspondence with young people who had been inspired by her example had provided motivation for her continued advocacy, while demonstrating the far-reaching impact that individual resistance could achieve. The healing process for Tyler's victims had been facilitated by support groups and counseling services that provided safe spaces for sharing experiences and developing coping strategies, with many participants reporting significant improvements in their mental health and social functioning as they processed their trauma and reclaimed their sense of personal agency. The community's acknowledgement of their suffering and its commitment to preventing future abuse had been crucial components of their recovery. Maya's graduation from Riverside Falls High School had been marked by her selection as valedictorian, an honor that reflected both her academic achievements and her positive impact on the school community during her time there. Her commencement address had focused on the importance of standing up for justice while working collectively to create environments where everyone could thrive, themes that resonated with an audience that had witnessed the transformation her courage had initiated. The legacy of Maya Chen's resistance to Tyler Morrison's abuse had become woven into the fabric of Riverside Falls' community identity, creating new expectations about accountability and mutual protection that would influence how conflicts were resolved for generations to come. Students entering the school system learned about the importance of reporting harassment and supporting their peers, while adults in positions of authority understood that enabling abuse would face serious consequences rather than being overlooked or minimized. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.